I think there's this really wishful, magical thinking that if I can do that right, maybe my child will turn out as this just amazing, godly person. I can condition them to be this kind of person who is first time obedient to God always and always walking in full obedience. I don't know what that magical thinking is, because there is not one relationship in my life that I have that expectation for with another adult. And in a lot of ways, it's treating children like machines, that they are programmable in some way, which I truly abhor, that way of thinking about children, or that they're kind of like pets to be trained.
Parents, have you ever felt confused about what godly discipline is actually supposed to look like? Perhaps you've read books or had friends or family members, people you love and who call themselves Christian, give you some pretty bold advice to just go ahead and spank your kids already, especially before it's too late to break that sinful will of theirs. If you've ever wrestled with that kind of advice or felt torn between honoring your faith and following your instincts for compassion and connection, this episode is going to bring you so much clarity and peace. Today, I am talking with Marissa Burt and Kelsey McGinnis, authors of this new powerful book called The Myth of Good Christian Parenting: How False Promises Betrayed a Generation of Evangelical Families. We are diving deep, you guys, into the roots of spanking culture, what Scripture actually says about spare the rod, and how parents of faith can move away from fear-based discipline towards connection, empathy, and Christ-like leadership in their homes. Can I get a hallelujah? So grab a cup of coffee or fill up your water bottle, settle in, and let's talk about what it really looks like to raise kids with freedom, peace, and a healthy faith they don't have to heal from once they grow up. Also, be sure to hit subscribe and follow the show so you don't miss future conversations that help you bring more calm and confidence into your parenting. All right, families, let's dive in. Please help me welcome Marissa and Kelsey to the show. Hello, families, and welcome back to a new episode of the Fresh Start Family Show. I am thrilled to be here today with Miss Kelsey McGinnis and Marissa Burt, who are co-authors of the new book, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting. Welcome to the show, ladies.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yes, we're delighted to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, this has been a long time in the making. I have admired your guys' work for a long time now. I feel like I might have met you online or through the gram probably about a year ago. And as soon as I saw you guys were writing this book, do you remember? I was like, hi, you must be on my show. You're going to come be on the show. And then here I actually have the book in my hands. It's beautiful.
Have it in
I
your
love
hand.
the cover.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're so excited. And I do remember that distinctly, because anytime someone who sort of interacted with our stuff who is kind of like in the parenting world, I'm always kind of like looking through the page, like, what kind of advice is this person giving? You never know. And so I was so thrilled that you were interested in our work and to see what you were doing. And so glad that you found us.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I have been it's been interesting. My own journey is I've always been very passionate about so I created Fresh Start Family, I think we're on our 8th year now, so about 8 years ago. And I always had this passion to have a very diverse organization that's not just for Christians. That was just my world. That's the way I love to live life. I just love diversity. I love everyone is welcome at this table. And because I'm of Christian faith, so many people are able to connect with that. And we have a program called Jesus Guided Parenting. That's a full 4-module program. So it's been so interesting through the years to kind of be able to help everyone understand the commonalities of the work, but then also really dive deep into helping the Christian families, because in my world, they are the ones who this work is hardest to implement because of the nervous system conditioning and really damage that gets done in that first decade by some of the more evangelical or high control teaching. So yeah, your guys' work is really important in our world. And today we're going to dive into our topic of the day is intense, but it's good. Spare the rod, strengthen the child, understanding and overcoming the spanking culture. And chapter 7 of your new book, you go into all the ways parents can understand, how did we get to this place where hitting and harming has become normalized, and a large section of Christian parents over the last 50 years have really been conditioned to believe that hitting and harming children is godly. And so we're going to have a conversation today around that and what we can do to unwind that, overcome the spanking culture. And we chose 5 of the things that you guys speak about to kind of speak into. So I just can't wait to hear your thoughts on all of this. It's really going to help people kind of unlearn some of the things that might have been ingrained in their nervous system, and it's going to help a lot of children. So first, as we always do, I'm going to start off with you, Kelsey. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Where do you live? How many kids you got? And what made you passionate about this topic? Because I think both of you are do a lot of worship music stuff, right? And then you were like, I'm going to dive deep into this topic. So
Yeah.
Kelsey, start us off.
Oh my goodness. I'm always joking with my colleagues that this is the strangest first book for me imaginable. I live in Iowa. I am the worship correspondent for Christianity Today. So most of the public facing writing I do is about church life and musical culture and worship practices. I do a little bit of writing outside of that too, but that's my area of academic training. I have a PhD in historical musicology. So I study and write about music history, particularly within the church.
My daughter's a drummer, so we admire musicians and those who respect music.
Female drummers, man, we need so many more. Playing trap set, or what's she doing?
She is actually a metal drummer. So she is literally legit. She started drumming when she was a kindergartner. And yeah, we were not raised in high control religion. So we never got the drumming is from Satan. So we were heck yes. She was a kinesthetic kid, strong-willed kid. And so we put her on a drum set at age 5 and she just thrived. It later turned into a high-level beach volleyball player. So always very kinesthetic, but the drumming was just right up her alley. And then as a family, we just love rock and roll. So she really took to it, and she's at a concert in New York City with Daddy right now. She's a senior in high school. So
amazing.
Yeah, big music family.
Okay, that's incredible. I won't go down that rabbit trail and ask a bunch more questions, but I want to. So anyway, that's my academic training. And I had my first child when I was still in grad school. I was finishing my PhD, and around the time she was 1, she's almost 8 now, I started looking into parenting resources. I was never a big babysitter. Parenthood was not something that I as a young person looked forward to. It just wasn't something I ever thought about. I think as a lot of parents do, you get to, toddler years and you're like, oh, I could maybe use some advice here. And so I picked up some books that either my parents had given me or friends had recommended. And I found myself just reeling as I looked at these resources like Shepherding a Child's Heart by Ted Tripp. And I read that book and I just, something is not right here. I was so confused by how Ted Tripp talks about children and sin nature and the role of parents. And then I went looking for mainstream resources and found this well of information about child development and what developmentally appropriate behavior was. I had never had someone tell me that a tantrum is developmentally appropriate, and I didn't need to try to fix my child if she was melting down. The only grid I had ever been given for that was sort of this is their sin nature coming out. Yes. And so at first it was really alarming. I felt like I was needing to decide in the moment, okay, if by believing that there are certain things that are developmentally appropriate, am I accidentally going to backslide and start giving sin a pass and do all the things that I've always been warned about? And I found myself sort of flailing for a while. And so my husband and I started keeping this running list, and even for a while started thinking about doing a podcast, because we were just how do we get this information all in one place, process it together, and try to do something about this? There's nothing out there. And then we were both well, we aren't the people to do that, so we'll just sort of do this for ourselves and move on. And so that's what we did. And then, years later, 2 years ago, I see Marissa posting on Twitter, X, about writing a book about the bad Christian parenting resources out there. And I reached out and was like, hey, I write for Christianity Today about music. This is not my beat or anything, but I've been doing all this random digging for years. If you ever want a conversation partner or ever have anything you want to talk about, I would love to. And that is how the book came about.
Mm-hmm. Amazing.
Isn't that wild?
That's so cool. And she was like, heck yeah. Hi, great to meet you. Let's become best friends.
It was great. I mean, it was one of the happiest things about social media. We connected
yeah.
and we had a conversation, and then we were like, should we try it? Should we do it? It has been a wonderful experience. And in many ways, I think the book is so much stronger with both of our perspectives than it would be as individuals, because, Kelsey brings this breadth of experience and background as a historian and cultural historian. And I come to it with a background in theology and church history. So that was really of interest to me. I have a master's in theology and studied sociology in undergrad. So I love the sociology of religion. So I was kind of interested in this topic because of that. But alongside, I'm married to a pastor, so I've been in church ministry for a couple decades. So seeing the ways high control religion, bad theology have real life impact, that this isn't theoretical, and certainly over a number of years, seeing the impact this sort of teaching has had on families made me curious and to think about how can we connect dots for people? Because a lot of times I think you read a parenting book when your children are young, and I'm the mom to 6, so I've read a fair number of parenting books over 2 decades as well. And then you set it aside and you maybe don't revisit it or you move out of that season of parenting. But as we have read over 100 at this point now and resources, you pick up stowaway, we call them stowaway theological doctrines. A lot of this teaching is spiritually formative for the children and also for parents and families. So certainly, there's so much we could talk about in any of these directions. But yes, spanking and corporal punishment is an integral piece across popular Christian parenting resources, and a really formative one as well.
Yes. And so, Marissa, thank you both for sharing just a little bit about how you got here and your family and all the things. Marissa, having a partner in ministry and being involved in ministry for so long, was your church circle, do you feel like looking back, you were never entrenched in that? Or was it, because I'm realizing after I spent about 13, 14 years in the evangelical world, megachurch world here in San Diego, and then we left and are now like in a different environment. So we're in a Disciples of Christ church, and I've noticed that like the United Methodists operate different, the Episcopalians operate different, the Lutherans around here, they're bringing in social emotional learning for the kids. They're not advocating punishment, like they're more in line. And I never knew that. But were you just always in a healthy circle, or were you guys entrenched in that too? And then after a while, you were like, oh, we're going to change.
Yeah, that's a good question. So personally speaking, I was raised in kind of evangelical, non-denominational churches. I also went to Catholic school, so kind of a mashup there. And then my husband's an Anglican priest. So that's kind of the tradition, the corner of the church we've been in. And as a result, no, I mean, certainly the children's ministry and things was more godly play, was child-centric in the parishes we've been in. However, when I first became a mother, this was back in South Carolina, we lived in the South, we were at an Anglican parish. And at the time, we moved away shortly after that and began to do some church planting work. But they were taking families through growing kids God's way. So I've often reflected back on that and thought, I would have just gone right into that, because that was in my church community. As a new parent, you don't necessarily have a sense of a framework to think critically about a lot of resources, particularly if older parents in your faith community are recommending it. And so that hasn't really brushed up against my own story as a parent, personally speaking, though Christian marriage resources, I've written about that. Maybe because as a newlywed, I imbibed so much of that, and then it was a disaster. And 2 years later, I was kind of like, nope, that I was more reticent. But I also think it's just fortunate circumstances that because we ended up out in the Northwest church planting, there just wasn't a lot of that in the water the way it was. So I say all that to say Anglican tradition, but it's not that it's not in my tradition, right? And I think that tracks with a lot of people's experience. Like if it's in your community, especially as a new convert or a new parent, it can be really appealing. And before you maybe even have a sense of your bearings as a parent, sometimes it even starts prenatally, you're being given these frameworks and asked to commit to them in a certain way.
Yeah. And Marissa, forgive me, what does that mean, an Anglican? Like, is there a certain denomination that is? I'm not thinking in my area of any Anglican church.
Sure. The Anglican denomination is the global communion associated with the Anglican Church. It's the largest ecumenical denomination globally. In America, a lot of times it's referred to as the Episcopal Church because when it started here, understandably, Americans didn't want to call themselves Anglican because of independence. But typically in the U.S., if you hear someone referring to the Anglican denomination, it's a more conservative strain than the Episcopal Church.
Got it. That's so helpful. Yeah. Okay. For a while, I was like, I didn't grow up in the church at all. I came to my faith at 19. And for a while, I was just like, I'd hear the big words and I'm like, I feel, I wouldn't ask. Now I just ask. And now I'm just like, how do you understand? What does this mean? And I've learned so much over the past 10 years. But Kelsey, before we get into our speaking points today, you did touch on something around when you first started this process of just challenging some of these books that have been put in your lap. And thank God, you got that divine calling and that you were able to listen to it and find that courage and had some type of nervous system safety to still explore and ask those questions and go on a different route. But we find in our community that so many parents, I can just think of 3 clients that I've just coached in the last week that are in my high level full mastery program, who they are still, and especially in the beginning, that feeling of danger of when you start going outside of those books feels so heavy on your nervous system. And I think so many people stop there. It's been very interesting to me to watch, especially since November, I guess over the last 8 years, to really expand my understanding of the nervous system combined with what happens when you are raised in a heavy fear environment. What happens to a human and how getting curious and questioning authority and doing it in a kind, respectful way, and then coming to your own thought patterns and especially things like following your heart when you have been raised in a world where the heart is deemed wicked and you're not supposed to trust your emotions and empathy is bad and it's going to take you down this hard route. What was it, do you think, that you and your husband had that allowed you to move through that and go forward in your own way instead of freezing and just staying in line with these books that had been handed to you?
That's a great question. I think a number of things helped with that. One is that my husband did not come to faith until he was 14, 15 years old. So he was not raised in a religious household. He had no attachment to any of these ideas. So him reading Shepherding a Child's Heart was the first time he had ever encountered Christian parenting teaching, and he was appalled. The copy of Shepherding a Child's Heart we have has pages of notes that he wrote in it as he was reading it.
Nice.
It just tripped everything for him. The other piece of my story there is that at the time in grad school, I worked at a think tank called the Center for Human Rights. It's a think tank at the law school of the University of Iowa, and it does social justice and human rights advocacy, teaching and research.
Oh, right.
And we were working on a child labor grant at the time. So I was very familiar with language of, rights of the child and autonomy, and was used to thinking about these ideas around child liberation. And so the disconnect between the language of that and the language in these books really struck me at that moment. And when I think about my own family systems, some of this comes down to luck. I grew up in what I would call very normie evangelicalism, SBC church in North Carolina, and then some Evangelical Free Church of America churches in the Midwest, where this heavy-handed parenting practice was there. But I have 2 parents who are not authoritarian personalities. My dad is not the overbearing, loud. I've never heard my dad yell in my life. He and my mom were on staff with Campus Crusade for Christ, but my dad's parents, his mom is a politician. She was a U.S. ambassador. She was the leader in that household. He had a dad who was totally comfortable with that, just being the counterpart to this high-powered woman. There were just this confluence of things in my background that I think primed me for seeing that things could be done differently. I had enough people in my life who were not overly attached to the really authoritarian model of family. under other circumstances, it could have gone another way. In some ways, I'm as drawn to extreme thinking as anybody else, but I think they're just that combination of things really helped. That when it got there, it was still scary. I still had this question of like, what if I'm walking away from the right way? Like, what if I'm walking away from the one right way? But there was a lot less fear and trepidation and people around me who felt safe enough to have those conversations with. So I'm really thankful for that.
Yeah, I am too. Yeah, it is a higher degree of difficulty for people not only to start educating themselves and going that way, and we just hear it all the time, is this immense fear that you are going to be led astray by a false prophet. And then, of course, we know that shuts down education. We know that the biggest, most successful authoritarian groups have used the restriction of education to control people, right? So it's just like so historically sound. And then fear, it feels like, keeps people stuck in like not learning the different way. And then they just keep doing what's been done. And in our line of work, we call that passing down painful generational cycles. And it just makes sense. And so, yeah, it's been interesting to see the world through a lens now where I'm like, oh, it makes sense why people respond to authoritarian leadership based in fear, because that's what they've known their whole life. So it makes sense that you had a lesser version, much less, like barely existent, and then hearing that your husband came to faith later in life is really interesting. I find with my students, the ones that came later, like I have a client that I'm thinking of, she grew up in Russia where it was kind of not banned totally, but you weren't really supposed to be a Christian, right? So she didn't find her faith till later. And she doesn't have this like fear mechanism. And then my other clients who like from birth, they had all the check marks of the traditional evangelical teachings. They have it strong. And it is like, it's not only hard for them to learn feel safe learning, but then when it's actually time to implement the strategies, they're knee jerk, it just really kicks in. So especially when it comes to discipline. So I'm thinking of a particular client who really thick, and also what a crazy time to be recording this episode a week after the death of Dobson, who was like the grandfather of the most, in my opinion, the most awful legacy. And it's just heartbreaking again. Thousands of students at this point that have been under my umbrella of care that I've watched and nurtured as they have healed from the harm that man did. But specifically, one of the biggest areas we know that type of influence is with the corporal punishment, is with this concept of thinking that the Bible really does, demand and command you to discipline your children through hurt and harm, and that is thing, that is godly. And yeah, some of my clients just, I have one in particular that I'm thinking of. I mean, she just shows up with such tenacity year after year, and she reverts quite often because it's just such a thick nervous system setting. So as we head into this next part of our conversation around overcoming the spanking culture, understanding it, and like moving into these points of like helping people understand how they can find the safety to go in a different direction, my goal is to just increase that safety, right? Like hopefully my prayer is that by listeners hearing two of these incredibly wise, educated women who have chosen to go a different way than a lot of these, that it is safe. That really is safe, even though your mother-in-law or your parent or your Bible study pal is like circulating the gentle parenting is from the devil articles. It's like, it really is safe. There's a lot of people who are wise, educated people who are going to help you understand a different way. So will you guys, let's go to Marissa first. When it comes to understanding and overcoming the spanking culture, we're going to go through some of these steps, but like, just set us up on like, what does that feel like for you as far as like, when let's just start with understanding spanking culture. And the book goes through such a great, like, kind of like timeline of like, here's how it all went down and here's why it became the dominant force.
Yes. Well, and I think for Christian families in particular, they received a very specific kind of spanking culture, one that says, one, God wants you to do this. God requires you to do this, or the Bible requires you to do this. So there's a spiritual incentive there. Often that comes with pretty significant stakes, eternal stakes, like we've talked about. Like, this is the right way, that it matters that your children learn to obey instantly so they can obey God. Or if you fail to do this, your child will be outside of God's blessing somehow. And often very fearful anecdotes are given. So this could be like societal dangers, or it could just be they're going to be rebellious. So there's incredibly high stakes. And then spanking is presented, we call it liturgized spanking. So it's not simply maybe what a number of cultures have done historically of just parents beating their children or kind of just wanting to inflict pain. Parents are told, well, this is somehow distinct from that, what you're going to do as a godly Christian. You are going to be taking them through the quote unquote right way to spank. So calm, pray first, be detached, spank, pray afterwards, reconcile. There's all these really made up steps that are offered to parents, but they've circulated since Dobson on as, don't worry, parents, if your intuition is flaring up, if this feels bad for you to do this, if it puts you in fight or flight to try and hit your child, you should ignore that, because God wants you to spank in this way, and this is the way you can do it. So I think
you can't trust your emotions. You can't trust your body.
Emotions. Exactly. That is weakness. And a lot of times it comes paired with theological messaging that already says emotions are probably sin. So people are already suspicious. And that also says you should be suspicious of voices outside of your trusted Christian community. So rather than a framework that says all truth is God's truth. So we can hear from social scientists researching, child development professionals researching. It says, nope, it has to be your trusted voice of spiritual authority, who often speaks with the voice of God and says, look, this isn't my opinion. This is the clear, plain truth of the Bible, which can be very compelling for devout people who respect Scripture, right? They respect that. So I would say the first and probably the biggest hurdle for people is to be reminded, and I will say this, I will always engage this conversation because I think it's such a deeply rooted myth. Nowhere does the Bible require parents to spank small children. Nowhere. This is not a biblical principle. Christian parents, if I could speak directly to you, I would say, I'm so sorry you have been misled on this front, because that messaging has come again and again from all kinds of avenues. It's simply not true. God does not require this of you. This is the message that is often given. And I think Christians need to hear from other Christians. That is a falsehood. And the way that a handful of verses from the Proverbs or from Hebrews 12 has been presented as though this is some sort of mandate for American evangelical practices of spanking is not exegetically or hermeneutically, it's not sound as far as Bible interpretation goes. It's not sound as far as what we know about the one anothering verses and the teaching, life, and ministry of Jesus. So I can talk about that if you'd like, but I just want to say directly to, we can be free of that heavy burden that often puts parents under this pressure cooker, this feeling of if I don't do this, I'm disobeying God, and instead we often will say there's tremendous freedom for the Christian parent, tremendous freedom. The Bible is not a parenting manual. And so I would just love to free parents up from that roadblock, so then they can begin to consider the research. They can listen to adult children. They can look at other tools, et cetera, because that first one often is the hurdle some people just can't get over.
I just love the way when you guys teach and present material, and I'm always seeing it through the Instagram lens, and now I'm seeing it through the book. It is so comforting and compassionate and clear with very firm kindness, or kind firmness. And I love that, because I just hear that with such conviction, Marissa. And so and what you did was you just hit on our first point, which is examine what's really biblical and what's cultural. If you have a desire to understand and overcome the spanking culture, and really that means not just stop thinking, like be able to choose compassionate discipline, understand why it's like really psychologically backed up with like research and data and all the things, but actually feel safe in exploring and educating yourself, right? But one of the things I've noticed as I've gotten to know you girls is, and I'm going to ask you this, Kelsey, is like, how have you handled, and I guess this is just a sidebar, but I just really wanted to ask you this, and then we'll move on to point number 2, is like how I actually have trouble like watching you guys sometimes when you so eloquently move into what I would call other, I don't know how to say it best. It's like a clap back. It's like someone will be like, here's this literally like, even hearing you speak, Marissa, like I'm such an empath that I think of these children and I think of like, I can't believe that this is like a thing. And so at this age, I'm 48 now, I get like sick to my stomach when I think of this. How have you been able to like write about this and read these words that we know has affected like hundreds of thousands of children? How have you found that safety to just be like, hi, so today we're going to talk about the way James Dobson, and like, how has that been for you? Kelsey, I know, Marissa, that was such a beautiful answer, so we'll let you, answer this one, Kelsey.
Yeah. I would say personally, I benefit from the experience of getting distance through research and reporting. I mean, there's a little bit of, when we started working on this book, there was a choice we had to make about what kind of book we wanted it to be. And we deeply wanted it to be a book that did not push people away who needed to read it. And
yes,
as much as I might have my share of snarky words or harsh words to give on the internet, which I don't like to give them on the internet. It never ends well. But I think we so badly wanted this to be a book that felt safe for people to reach for and to fully engage with. We wanted to feel like trustworthy people and to actually be not like we're putting on the front, we wanted to actually be trustworthy people. Yeah. That if someone was still like, this is something that I do and I feel like it's the right thing, like, tell me I'm wrong. You know, I want that person to talk to me without the fear that I'm going to be like, how dare you, someone in your life should call Child Protective Services, you know, like I want to be a safe person. And I think because I'm also still deeply embedded in communities where these resources circulate. So I do truly empathize with and feel for children who I know who are in households where some of this is practiced. And I also love their parents and know their parents. And that's just a hard place to be. So some of it is being able to kind of put on reporter, researcher hat and treat it as a topic of inquiry. And the other piece of it is wanting to be safe more than wanting to get to air all of my thoughts and opinions, even though I think I'm right, you know?
Yeah. So, and you probably through your training, like, you mentioned like you're a historian, basically your training is in, so I can see how that really benefited you. And then God took this divine gift and calling and then allowed you both to just be like, okay, today, welcome to class. We're going to talk about this, where I'm like, oh my God, this is so, hey, obviously my skill set isn't teaching the how to, right? Like I'm like, hey, sit down. So happy you're here. Now I'm going to like really help you understand how to do it differently. But just the whole like speaking to what's been taught has just been pretty gnarly. I had a student yesterday, she said, hey, here's a thing that's my mother sent me. And this is the same amazing student who has said she was spanked at 3 years old, and her parents laugh about this. They tell it around the like Christmas table 32 times in one day. And how, they laugh that they still didn't think it broke her will. And so she said, hey, I would love to see you do more of these clapbacks. And I was like, I love you. And I can't do it. Go see Kelsey and Marissa. Like, clapback is as the harsh word. Like, like a really, you guys do it in a way that is a kind analysis. And that's the way you do write your book. Like it is a welcoming conversation piece. And so great job, because that is a skill set that I know you both have invested in to be able to learn how to do that. Okay, number 2 of our points, if we're going to support a family who wants to understand and overcome the spanking culture, is notice where the pressure is coming from. So I'll come back to you, Marissa, to answer this one.
Yeah, I mean, we hear from a number of people how much community pressure they have to spank. Like maybe they, welcomed a baby and said, I don't feel good about this, but their extended family has put a lot of pressure on them, or they feel pressure from their church community. We've heard from people who've been excommunicated from churches because they chose not to spank. I think there are some regional distinctives here. Like we hear from a lot of people in the Bible Belt that it's like they are the lone person, they feel like, in their community who is maybe choosing a different way because the spanking culture, it's a useful term, is so ingrained. So I think there's that external pressure. I think it can come through parasocial relationships online, right? People find an influencer they like for whatever reason, or they're in Christian influencer circles, and that can create a kind of echo chamber, this feeling of culture warring that comes into it, of, like you mentioned, Wendy, the like gentle parenting isn't biblical. So you can kind of get a steady content of that, and you can hear those voices over your shoulder, even in the privacy of your own home. And then I think as we touched on a little bit, there's internal pressure. Like parenting is triggering. It's inevitably triggering. And so if someone grew up in a home where it wasn't safe to do anything but instantly obey without question, then if their child doesn't obey without question, it's going to trigger that. And often, sometimes in ways that they can't overcome. So they may think to themselves, I don't want to spank. And then in those triggered moments, that is what they are reaching for. So there's a lot of complex. And again, it's as unique as every person is, as every family culture is, how these things might manifest. But those all add up to a significant layers that I think keep people feeling stuck in this. And when we wrote our book, we also hoped it would be accessible to people outside the evangelical community, like therapists or spiritual directors or even pastors from different corners of the church, because I think without either being part of that community or really reading a lot of these resources, I think it's very difficult to understand how immersive that is. It can feel like, well, why can't people just leave this behind? Or why are Christians digging their heels in on this? Like, why are they some of the last people defending this? It can feel very confusing if that's not part of your subculture. So, because I think, it really is that ingrained. And to challenge that can feel like pulling out one of those bottom cards in a house of cards, a tower. It can really shake some foundations, some theological foundations, some ideas about anthropology of humans, about God's perspective on people, a number of things. And so I think a lot of people will kind of double down in resistance. And also, if that is someone's own childhood story, it requires a dethroning of their own parents. And that can be very vulnerable to revisit, to say, well, what if my parents didn't need to do that? How do I make sense of that? And I think that can be really painful for a lot of people. And anecdotally, I certainly see this in almost every resource. The person advocating for this kind of ritualized liturgical spanking will recount anecdotes from their own childhood that reveal it was a piece of their experience. So I think, what did you call it? Generational cycles?
Yeah, painful generational cycles.
Right. I think that absolutely is a significant piece that often the people in most need of deconstructing some of that are the most fearful of deconstruction or the least equipped to begin to do that work, because this has been their community for all the things you mentioned earlier, the curiosities, the fear, all of that makes it really difficult, I think, to begin to remove that piece and see what happens. Can feel very scary, or can feel like, if I screw this up, is there like a cosmic punishment awaiting me?
Yes. Yeah. And so noticing where the pressure is coming from at least gives you the awareness and the clarity, right? And I think, again, like all those years that I was in like the deep evangelical spaces, I just thought this was Christian culture. And now what I would just like to add is like, when you become clear, okay, it's coming from this particular, let's just say if it's coming from within your church culture, knowing that you actually do have a choice. It feels like you don't when you're so entrenched in it. You feel like, well, this is just what it takes to be a Christian. And then you start to realize, like, I got like asked to step down from volunteering at the last time we left it. Now I'm like in a fully affirming, fully inclusive, justice, joy, inclusion like church. It's amazing. I'm so happy. I've never been happier. But when I got asked to step down from leadership because they were like, oh, you know, you're going to confuse people or you're going to scare people or whatever it may be. I was so shocked that I happened to have like a post go viral that I didn't mean to go viral, but through that, people educated me of like, hey, you know, there's a million spaces that you could go to. And I know that's me coming from a big city, right? Like I know if you're in a small town, that's not necessarily true, but I was shocked to find out that there was 5 churches within 2 miles from me that operated totally different and didn't have this like internal pressure, right? Like now I'm at a church where a lot of things are different, but one of them is like, I came to which is where I rent my office too at my church, but I came to my pastors when I saw they had created this new little booklet for new people. And I was like, oh, I love this. And I get my whole thing on like, hey, I believe children are the most oppressed group in the world. And I like, what if we stood for like safety of children too? And they're like, okay, great. Just give us what you want us to write and we'll put it in there. And I'm like, really? Because I spent 10 years teaching in the evangelical church world. And I was like, it was like a miracle that I would be allowed to teach, right? And it was just, you could feel this like heaviness of like, most people got their eye on you and what are you teaching? Compassionate discipline? Okay. And I've even had students, I remember I had one student, who was that in? I'm trying to think of, oh, okay, I know who it was in my head. And she shared in a podcast interview that we did with Christina Dronin, who runs Gentle Christian Parenting, coolest like public facing Facebook group. And she's just done some wonderful work. She's amazing and brings people together who have an interest to learn more. And our podcast episode was on parenting with the fruits of the Spirit. And she shared that with her Bible study group, and they called her in for a meeting, and her father, because they were concerned that she was worshiping the devil. And we were like, really? And she was like, yeah. And she's gone on to do amazing work. Like she was able to press in and still be amidst this group. Obviously her father is still her father. And I know it's not that easy for everybody, right? Like to have that type of heat on you and still choose a different way. But maybe just normalizing the stories that this does happen quite often and that it doesn't mean that it's accurate truth. It just means that for some odd reason that I cannot explain with all of my understanding of human behavior and child development and psychology, I do not understand why they press people so hard on this. Like you would think it would just be one of those things that they were like, okay, you're going to choose not to hit your kid, but they come in aggressive in some circles.
They really do.
Yeah, I like the idea of awareness.
Awareness, and some people, we hear from a number of them, may need to hear it. This can be an issue where maybe you do need to find a different community, church community, especially, I will often say, especially if this is getting preached about from the pulpit, joked about by other adults. Like these are also flags that this is not a safe community for children, period. Like not just like if you're deciding not to do this, but can still stick it out there. Like there is not an ability to safeguard children if that is happening. And the trickle down of that is it also won't be a safe place for you as an adult either, because the way children in church parenting doctrine are treated is the way individual parishioners will be treated in the church family system. So sometimes these can be markers that like it's time to go.
Yeah, and we all want the in-person space, but I will say that these days, like if you just want to experiment with like, what is church from home feel like? And there is a million online resources that stream live now that you can still feel like you are. And I have a friend when that whole thing shook out with that last evangelical church, when we finally left, she texted me within minutes, and I would have never known that she had gone through this type of similar thing before where she was like, oh my gosh, same thing happened to us. And we decided to form our own little small group. And she's up in Santa Barbara, and she's like, we've now been meeting for like a year. It's like 10 or 12 of us. We all have young kids. We get together, we do church like online, and we just made it work, and that was a cool message to hear of like, there are different ways to do it, and it can feel really scary. Okay. Let's move on to this next one. Kelsey, I'll pass the mic to you on this one, is rethinking the obsession with first-time obedience. What can you add there as far as like helping people exit that conditioning?
Yeah, that is such a recurring idea. And I over the last couple months even, I've seen a couple like pretty high performing posts on social media about first-time obedience and how in our household, if it's not the first time, it doesn't count.
With a happy heart.
There's a real, with a
not
happy
just
heart.
Obedience, but with a happy heart. So if you're a little pissed about it as a kid, you're still going to pay the price.
Yeah, it doesn't count. It doesn't count. That's not real obedience, right? So I think like for me, this is one of those like easiest ones to bring the wind out of, because I feel like I can, as someone who is not a theologian by training, I feel like I can pretty comfortably look at people and say, does God ask that of you? Does God ask that of me? Did Jesus ask that of his disciples? How many times do we see Jesus teaching the same lesson over and over, or God dealing with his children, teaching the same thing over and over? That willingness to teach the same thing over and over is, I think, something that we see. And I find it so strange that a lot of these resources basically hold children to a standard of performance in a relationship that we do not hold any other human being. We do not hold our spouses to these kinds of standards, right? Like, and it's a different kind of relationship, but at the same time, I think there's this really wishful, magical thinking that if I can do that right, maybe my child will turn out as this just amazing godly person. I can condition them to be this kind of person who is first time obedient to God always and always walking in full obedience. I don't know what that magical thinking is, because there is not one relationship in my life that I have that expectation for with another adult. And in a lot of ways, it's treating children like machines, that they are programmable in some way, which I truly abhor that way of thinking about children, or that they're kind of like pets to be trained. Yeah, I think that sitting with that thought for a minute and just being, first of all, so grateful that I, in my walking with God throughout my life, have been shown more grace than that my husband shows me more grace. Not that my husband orders me around, but if he asks something of me and I say no, or we are having an argument, like, just think about what kind of relational standard that is. What kind of authentic relationship can you have with someone who has that kind of expectation of you, and a series of punitive actions they will take if you don't measure up, or they can take every time you don't measure up?
Absolutely. Yeah, the instant obedience trap is... I remember sitting around a table I was out to dinner actually with these two women, and she knew I was a teacher at the time. They were from church, and she knew I was a teacher of this work. And she was like, well, what about this instant obedience things? Because we had dinner last week and it was at church, at that big evangelical church we were at for a long time. And she's like, we sat at this table, and Dad was a doctor. So it was like this clout, this like respect was there. And she was like, and they had 5 kids. And I'm telling you, they were perfectly behaved at that table. And he let us know that, like, yeah, he had to break their will young. And she went on to just admire this, like, obedience, right? And it's like, on one hand, you really understand as a parent, right? You're like, that does sound like the dream. It really, to just be able to have a meal where your 5 children don't fight with each other. But also on the other side, like, I know as an educator what that takes to get that. And the asking yourself, are you willing to use that type of fear and force in your home and make that the North Star? And is that what you want, right? So lots to unpack there. Knowing that yes, that is a thing. And there is a lot that, you guys do so much in the book to help people understand that they can take a different path and that is wise and smart. And when you look at human development and the way God designed us with free will, it makes more sense to offer grace and repeat the lesson sometimes and do it, I will add, with my work, because then you're going to have more effectiveness, right? I think there's an ineffectiveness to the classic ways that parents are scratching their head thinking, it's not working. I've told him 5 times to not touch his, well, because there are different ways that you can use to influence your kid that don't involve overpowering, that don't involve fear and force, that don't involve modeling what you don't want your child to do. That's where obviously my work comes in, that I can help people get their child to learn the lesson maybe after 2-3 mistakes versus 27, right? Which is what we see long-term actually with a lot of times, like what people, when they believe in the first time obedience myth, so to speak, the lesson long-term isn't learned. It's just hidden well. Like it's why you see, I think, a lot of teenagers end up rebelling, but they do it really well behind closed doors. Real good at lying and like not telling the truth and then feeling awful about themselves if they get caught. So
and just the setup for long-term relationship. I mean, we spoke with a number of people who experience inauthentic connection or estrangement as adults with their parents. And I do think instant obedience can work, quote unquote, in the young years, if you're willing to. As you said, what are you willing to do there? When children are small, and you can still force compliance, but at a certain point, the receipt for that comes due, and the ability to have an authentic relationship has been short-circuited, and also parents have kind of day in and day out trained themselves to expect instant compliance in all things, and there's really not a off-ramp for that. If that is your belief that you're owed that, and it's really tragic. It's really sad how it has robbed so many families of connection that could be theirs and relationship that could be theirs, because none of this is without kind of natural consequences in that sense. It does have impacts down the road as well.
Yeah, it's true. I know there's a million people, sorry, Kelsey, to say like, I'm fine. Just yesterday, I had someone in my DMs who's so sweet. She's like an older parent who showed up and she's like, thank you for all that you've shared. She said, I've been a kindergarten teacher for 22 years. First of all, I'm like, I love you. Thank you for your service. And then she said, I did follow these teachings, these Dobson teachings, and I regret it with all my heart. And she said, I now have adult children and they haven't spoken to me in 2 years. And it's like, I just told her, I'm like, how can I help? Like I can help you get to a place that maybe we can help you repair the relationship, because I really admire the people who have the humility to come in later and say, yikes, I darn it, which we know a lot of people, some people go to their grave saying, nope, that is godly, and that is, nope, yep, no, my kids are fine, everything's fine, but a lot of people are able to find the humility later in life, and my prayer is that they will be able to make amends and have the true relationship where your kids actually want to come home for Christmas, not because they have to. What were you going to say, Kelsey? I cut you off.
Well, I was just going to say, I would also caution parents against looking at behavior around a dinner table looking at other and believing, yes, my children sat through this dinner with no problems because we require first time. We've taught them that, the expectation is first time obedience. That could have very well been luck of one night. You know what I mean? You do not see what happens in their home. You don't know how involved this dad actually is in the day in and day out of all of this. There are just a million questions I would have that, there's just no way for me to know. But I would want people to feel free to not look at families with parents who say, we implement these and this is why my children are so well behaved. They may have gotten lucky and gotten children with temperaments, or maybe children who figured out earlier on that I need to be afraid of my parents. I better, there could be a lot happening. And in some families, maybe not. In some families, maybe yes. But just don't put yourself in that position of feeling self-doubt because of what you think you see in outcomes with other people's children, I think.
Yeah. I think a lot of those air quotes successful instant obedience families, I'm like, you probably didn't get a strong-willed kid to the level that, because they are just the best at raising the red flag and being like, no, we are going to get this out of our family legacy. Okay, so that helps, ladies. Thank you so much for answering that one. Let's move on to the next one. I think I might have done Kelsey on that one. So let's put this one to you, Marissa. Challenge the belief that children deserve pain. If we want to understand and overcome this spanking culture, how do we step into challenging this belief that, which is really like an overarching belief that we deserve pain, but specifically for children?
I would say a couple things. One, I would say to everybody from every background, like, we have good research that shows this is just not effective. Like, if you're looking for an effective way to teach or instruct or even correct, we've good 50 plus years of good research saying this isn't effective. It's correlated with increased behavioral problems, with more difficulty regulating, et cetera. That's set aside from the conversation about, is it ethical, which is an important conversation to have. You know, like, do we inflict pain on other people who are under our care? Like, do we inflict pain on people with cognitive disabilities or on elderly people under our care who can't maybe understand? Because that's often an excuse given. Well, children who are too little to understand or reason with, we should hit them. But we simply don't do this with other people who maybe don't have the capacity to understand instruction or understand the reasons given. So there's an ethical question there. And then I think, given how we're in some respects speaking specifically to Christian parents as well, I would say, look, this is not in alignment with the life and teaching of Jesus. Certainly, he had very strong words for people who hurt children or put stumbling blocks in front of their faith, both of which I think this teaching does. When he interacted with children, he welcomed them directly and personally and related to them. His interaction with them felt like a blessing on them. And his correction, his indignation, actually, it's the only time he gets indignant with his disciples, is with the adults who would keep children from getting to him. Also, hitting children is at odds with the only explicit instruction Christian parents get in the New Testament, which is repeated twice for emphasis. Fathers, do not provoke or embitter your children to anger. So I think for people looking for biblical kind of principles, that's a good one. Like, is the practice I'm doing embittering my child? Then I should not do that. I should find a different way. I should look to the other relational principles, one anothering principles. Be patient, be long-suffering, be forbearing, restore the one who sins gently. There's a number of them. Love your neighbors, including your smallest and newest neighbors. Like, there just is such a wealth in the Christian tradition to say it's the kindness of God that brings us to repentance. He defines himself as compassionate and long-suffering, slow to anger. So there's much there for devout parents to consider. And I think it really invites the next question, which is what is it in me and my view of God or something about the world that believes when people are underperforming or are misbehaving or made a mistake, that they need to be punished for that? Like, what, because I really do think that's at the root of it, this idea that we have, whether it's parents venting their own anger, they're so overwhelmed and frustrated and feel like that's going to resolve something here, or this idea that what a child has done is so offensive to my parental authority and to God himself that it needs to be punished. And I'd say this is a pagan idea. This is not a Christian idea. So I think there's a lot to challenge there, and it does stir up tender spaces, but there's an invitation there, because if that's not true, what does it mean that God so loves us, that when he decides to show us what he's like, he doesn't come with punishment. He comes to be with us, to draw near to us, to connect with us. He becomes incarnate. And this invitation to love in that Christ-like way can be an invitation for ourselves to receive that radical grace and love of God. And yeah, it often makes me think, last thing I'll say on this point is, it often makes me think there's a story in the New Testament Jesus told of a man who had done things wrong and was expecting this kind of ruthless punishment from his master and expected that. And he's surprisingly forgiven, off the hook, set free, does not have this disastrous consequences on him and his family. And as he's like leaving, he turns around and to someone under his care owes much less, has made much smaller mistake. And he decides to react with this exacting and ruthless way and says, throw him in jail. And I think that story, if we would let it settle with us, says so much about the human condition, the way we're so eager to see the specks in other people's eyes, the way we are desperate to receive grace and compassion for ourselves, and yet so poorly equipped to turn around and extend that to other people. And yet that is the Christian invitation. That is the simplicity of the task given us, to love God and love others in the way that he has loved us. So I really think, and we see it when we hear from people, as they begin to consider an invitation out of this, they find deep places of themselves, inside themselves, healed as well, particularly if this is part of their story or something they've been trapped in. It really can set people free, because when we say this teaching betrayed entire families, we mean that. Like, yes, children bear the brunt of this. It also betrayed parents, and everyone's operating under this heavy yoke that says God is just waiting to pounce on us. And that is not good news. That is not the gospel of good news. So I think I can't even remember the original question, but that's where I meandered to get to. So.
I love it.
Yeah.
Challenging the belief that children deserve pain. And that's what's so interesting. It feels like to me, there seems to be like a splitting of the sea, so to speak, in Christian communities where there is a section of Christianity that is going harder than ever into punishment culture, that they are like going further down to confirm and justify that people do deserve pain, including children. And, the eye for an eye mentality and revenge behavior. I mean, it is hard to understand how a section of Christianity could really feel good about that. And we see that it really is happening. And so just leaning into that, knowing that there is a whole different section. I love your words. You said different corners of Christianity. It feels like these different corners that are teaching different things and believing different things are so small. But when you add them up, they are big. And sometimes the loudest voices that come from these like very, very large accounts or mega churches, it feels so scary. But just, I think, knowing that there are a lot of Christians who this is the basis of our faith, that like once Jesus came into the picture, this just things changed, and compassion was the way. And so, yeah, God is waiting to pounce is something that is still, I see by my students, is really that they struggle through. Just yesterday with my full mastery students, we're having a conversation around like, does God let bad things happen? And you can see some of the clients, again, who were raised deep in the evangelical circles. They really almost do believe that we have to endure the suffering. Life for them is a lot about the suffering and the pain. And yes, that is what we need. And so re-examining this, I love what you said about how that can be such an invitation. And that's what my faith journey has looked like, is it feels like it's evolving. It feels like it's getting stronger as I start to release some of those things that I might have picked up that 12 years that I was in that world. So thank you, ladies. I'm gonna leave it at 4 today, because I feel like 4 ways that parents can understand and overcome the spanking culture that we discussed. There are so many more ways that you guys cover in your book. There are so many more, like even more important, like different important points that you guys cover. But thank you. Thank you for just pouring into my community today. Thank you for sharing all of your thoughts and your wisdom and your experience and your education and your opinions on this. I know a lot of people are going to be blessed through this book. I know a lot of children are going to have a much different future because their parents now have more confidence and more safety to go that different route, the fork in the road that is before them, that they have more courage now because of this book. So let everybody know. I think I'll pass it back to Kelsey now. Kelsey, let everyone know where they can find the book. And I think it'll be out by the time this episode airs. Let us know, please, and where they can come find you guys, follow your incredible work, and even the music stuff.
Yeah, you can find my writing at Christianity Today, but for this, the book comes out from Baker. We'll send you a link to put in the show notes where people can, if this show is going to come out after the book is out, that's fine. We'll send you just the link where it will be. You can pre-order it if it comes out before.
When does it drop again?
14th.
October 14th. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. So we'll send you a link for the show notes for that. You can find both of us on Substack. We both publish there. And a lot of our content, as you said, Wendy, is on Instagram. I'm Kelsey K. McGinnis there. And we love when people find us there and engage with stuff. We loved finding you there, Wendy, and so appreciate the work that you're doing with individuals to unpack this in their sort of personal context. That's just work that, I don't get to do as a historian and a writer. And so I'm so grateful that there are people who are doing that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And how about you, Marissa?
Yes, same. You can find me across social media at Burt Writes, and we talk about all these things and more, and would love to connect with you there. And if you do pre-order, we have some pre-order bonuses that tie into this topic, kind of making the Christian case against corporal punishment. So reach out if that's of interest to you.
That's so good. And I will just add one more thing. Kelsey and Marissa, thank you for the mothering work you are doing with your human souls. As this episode, we were recording it today after a day that was really hard in America. Yesterday, we had our 57th, I think it was, in 2025 mass shooting at a school K through 12. And of course, as all of our hearts are breaking, thank you. Everything that you are teaching in this book and that you are advocating for is literally preventing this type of thing in the future. And in a world that feels like it's just so scary right now, just thank you for raising your human souls in a different way, where you're not growing up with culture and they're not growing up with an eye for an eye and punishment and thinking that that's the way that things are going to get better and that it's godly to punish and do these type of things. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. And thanks for being on the show, and thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Before you go, I have a question for you. What if parenting felt peaceful and empowered? And what if your days with your children felt connected and joyful, even if you are raising a strong-willed child or kids who really aren't shy with bringing the sass? Look, I know that you have worked so hard to become a loving, generous parent. So why does it feel so stressful? Well, I want to introduce you to something brand new that I've created called the Fresh Start Family Quick Start Learning Bundle, where I share my 3 secrets to empower, connect, and build true collaboration with your strong-willed child or kiddo that pushes back often. Because empowerment and connection as a parent starts with you leading the way towards more peace and joy in your home, not waiting for your kids to become easier or your spouse to become more supportive. This free learning guide and 1-hour interactive workshop will help you rewire your nervous system around misbehavior, stop the reactive parenting patterns, and implement an easy, powerful parenting framework that sets you up for success with more cooperation, respect, and connection in your home. Plus, it comes with the 5-minute Say This, Not That reset to give you an instant lift with a cooperation from your kids. So you can have increased peace and joy as a parent anytime you want. All you need to do to get the free Quick Start Learning Bundle and save your seat for the interactive workshop is go to freshstartfamilyonline.com/power. Hooray! You made it to the end of a Fresh Start Family Show episode. Thank you so much for being here. If you have a quick second, make sure you hit subscribe to our show so you can be updated when our new episodes drop. I will see you back soon for the next episode.